small hours of the morning, while the whole wide world is fast asleep. You lie awake, thinking of the girl. Never even think of counting sheep, while the whole wide world has learned its lesson. She'd be yours if only she would call in the wee small hours of the morning. It's the time I miss her most of all.
Welcome to you all, friends, colleagues, stakeholders, and business partners from the World Employment Confederation. Welcome to this session, this interactive session titled The New Talent Frontier, Opportunities for the HR Services Industry to be the ambassadors of the new inclusiveness. Welcome to you all. Today, we will be talking about our labor markets and how they responded to the consequences of COVID-19. Today, in this session, we will also talk about active labor market policies and how they look like and what are the key elements for success. What is the possible role for our industry and how and what does public-private partnership exactly looks like? This and much more today, this morning in this session. I'm your host for today. My name is Jurjen Koops. I'm the managing director of ABU, which is a proud member, the Dutch member of the World Employment Confederation. Welcome again to all of you. Today, we have three honorable guests in our midst, and they will introduce this topic to you, and we together will hold a conversation, a panel discussion on this topic. First of all, we have Christine Langebroeger, economist from the OECD, and she will introduce what are the challenges of the post-corona labor market and what does effective labor market policy looks like. Welcome to you, Christine, first of all. Second, we have Elodie Fasi, team leader of the public employment services within DG Employment, and she will focus on public-private partnerships and what are the key elements for success. And she will be happy to hear all your experiences in the different countries on public-private partnership regarding the new inclusiveness. So share the conversation through the chat. And last but not least, Madeline Hill will introduce General Manager Diversity and Inclusion from Randstad, Australia. So we're really having a worldwide conference. Welcome to you also. And she will give you a best practice on how to create a successful employment model for disabled people in Australia. Welcome to all the three of you. And welcome again to all the people sharing this conversation and this session through the chat. Let's make it an interactive session. I hope to hear you will all engage and share your thoughts and your minds and your remarks, especially on how public-private partnership looks like in your country. So we will having a discussion this hour. And first of all, I give the floor to Christine Langeburger, and she will introduce the challenges of the post-labor market for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Julian, for this introduction. And many thanks to the World Employment Confederation for the invitation to this conference and to this very important session. I think we're now discussing certainly the more challenging groups to place in the labor market. And I will go on with my presentation. So title like reconnecting people with jobs. So how can we achieve this after this crisis, which is not yet over, as we all know? So just to set a bit the scene and look at the labor market situation across OECD countries. Well, I'm sure you've seen the figures, you see them regularly. There's still 8 million more people unemployed and 14 million more people inactive than before the COVID-19 crisis. And for the OECD, the latest OECD estimates foresee that employment will not recover until the third quarter of 2023. And that's the average. And you can see there's quite a few countries where we even expect it to take longer. On the one hand, obviously, the others are expected to pick up more quickly. But I think this is always looking at those averages. I think today's session is also about those people that struggle more. We already now see long-term unemployment creeping up, and I'm sure you're the right ones to know. Like, I mean, the longer somebody has been out of employment, the more difficult it gets for them to find their place again in the labor market, finding employers that trust also a person that has a longer gap in their CV, have been out for a longer period of time. As after the global financial crisis, we're again concerned very much about young people that are neither continuing in education nor have made the transition into the labor market or have lost their connection with the labor market, because many young people were the ones that were set free first. And then obviously there's many other groups. There's as you know, low paid and low educated workers have been impacted more. For the low paid, often because they've been not covered by the very generous job retention schemes that almost all OECD countries put in place. But there's others, and I think Madeleine will also later talk about other groups. So these are people where there will be extra efforts needed. And I think the big questions that we ourselves at the OECD ask us, are employment services systems, whether it's the public side or the private side, truly ready for this? Do they have the capacity? So in order to assess a bit like what it takes to have this capacity for having responsive active labor market policies during the times of crisis and beyond, the OECD last year, together with the European Commission, addressed to the OECD's constituency a questionnaire, and this was around also like, what does it make to make a system, the system in your country, more agile and help you with effective responses in the past already with the global financial crisis, and now with the current one. So I think to start a bit at the bottom here, there is obviously regulation, as you know, is always an important one. I mean, there are just countries where regulation is more flexible than others. So many countries that had an agile response this time around were the ones that didn't have to change any legislations, while there were others that had to change it. But obviously no need to say there is a need for strong political will. Flexibility of resources, I think we at USD bang on like to countries to make sure that they properly finance their systems and put enough money out there in order to help people back, because we just know active labor market policies help like to connect people with jobs. And I think you all can only agree with me, over the past year, devoted and adapting staff have been one of the key drivers of responses in any kind of respect. Obviously, preparedness for a crisis, there are some countries that seem to be better prepared just because they had plans. And obviously, the COVID crisis was special with all the social distancing. So obviously, whoever had already achieved a high level of digitalization before the crisis was in a much better position than those that didn't. And then to move on maybe a bit to the topics that I hope we can discuss together today is stakeholder engagement between the government, public employment services, the social partners, and obviously key your constituency, the private employment services. So this was highlighted by many countries. It was so important to work together on this. We're all sitting in the same boat here. And then obviously also a bit of a question of the organizational setup of the public employment services. And here, those countries that already have mature and trustful relationships with private providers felt that they were also in a better position thanks to these type of cooperations and partnerships. So this is maybe to echo what Shirin said before, like we're always keen to hear about examples. So please later in the discussion, step forward. Yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to say, setting the scene. I'll hand back over to you, Shirin, and looking forward to discussing with you afterwards.
Thank you very much, Christine, for this brief introduction into the topic. I asked the audience if there are any questions or any remarks, please put them to the chat, and I will put forward the question and remarks to the speakers. I have a question, Christine, related to one of the topics you mentioned as essential. It is a mature and trustful relationship with private providers of employment services. Have you any examples or where this was a success, or what is a key for success in a mutual relationship?
I think what we certainly found out over the past year is like it starts with regular exchange. So wherever the public side and the private side already have a history of regularly exchanging with each other, there certainly it was like easier to inform each other, to have like quick support. You remember last year we had this issue of finding enough care workers in many countries and medical staff. So these, I think, were important areas where it was important for the private and the public side to talk to each other. I think it's no secret, certainly this is something that the Netherlands stressed itself. We're Europe-based, Syrian, and I think a similar story we heard of Flanders, of France, but also many other countries. It's just said like this, like keeping the conversation going. And then obviously also in this, I mean, you know, we all had to find our feet last year in keeping these conversations going that before often were in person through like regular meetings, but then also moving that digital, continuing to exchange information. I think that was really the important element here. And then this idea of trust, of being able to refer job seekers to the private side if there were needs identified.
Okay, thanks. One more question from my side. You mentioned also one of the issues which make labor markets better prepared is the high level of digitalization. And this high level of digitalization is related to the job market, to the information exchange within the job market, But does this also go for the services of public employment services to job seekers? Because in the Netherlands, there's quite a discussion if online, if you can help people with a more distance to the labor market, if you can help them online. It was an advantage during Corona, but it's now an issue which is discussed. And what do you mean with the high level of digitalization? Do you also mean the online services?
Exactly, absolutely. The online services. Obviously, what we observed last year in the very first days was actually that a lot of countries didn't even had setups for making available online claims for unemployment benefits, and then obviously for companies on the other hand for the job retention schemes. So this is something that actually a lot of countries started to set up or accept at the main route. So obviously there's more these administrative transactions that were really important. But then beyond like this idea of getting money to the people in the form of unemployment benefits and to companies, there's certainly this service element. And again, here we saw that many countries, and again, I have to name the Netherlands here, many countries were prepared for that, of already like having the possibility to fully serve job seekers digitally, and basically even in the pre-COVID times, never necessarily requiring a job seeker to ever come into a office anymore. Obviously, these countries were better placed to just make that available or to all of the job seekers. But there's certainly, there is this element that digital services are not for everyone. And, but I think here the important learning from last year is they're not for everyone yet available, or not everybody can use them yet. And I think this should be our aspiration to now that meetings usually can happen in person again, that in theory, like should ever like there be a confinement again, like to get job seekers ready to using these digital systems, because in the end the transactions are still not the most complicated ones, and I think that there's many people who are still not comfortable in even claiming the unemployment benefits online or having a meeting with an advisor online. And I think this is something where the current crisis also, well, should help countries to develop new systems to recognize which job seekers are not yet ready. And then I think there's always the big question, well, who's responsible for people who are not fully digitally capable? And I think employment service systems are like a very good point to pick up these people and take them along on the route of transforming their lives into being able to, yeah, make more transactions in their life digital, and obviously, which is such an important aspect in finding your place in the future labor market.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking if there's any question from the audience. I don't see any in the chat, so if you have them, please put your questions forward through the chat. I have one last question for you, Christine, for this moment. You said something about the short-term response of labor markets to the COVID crisis, which is the abundance of people who are seeking for a job. But there is also a long-term question regarding the labor market, which is the mismatch and the shortages we face, at least in Europe. Does that need any other response, or is there anything extra needed for solving this mismatch and these shortages? I cannot hear her.
Okay, yeah, okay, sorry, it was exactly the other way around. Here I'm back. Okay, so I think here there's really a bit of the questions for countries like to take a stepwise approach. I mean, first of all, as the slide showed, I mean, all countries across the board face more unemployed people. So I think that the important bit is to to get those people back into employment as fast as we can. Those that are easier to serve, those that have the skills that match labor market needs. But obviously with the digital transition, with the greening transitions, I mean, we will have more job seekers that will not find their jobs again in the labor market. And I think here the answer really is like providing people with the necessary training, either through classroom-based training, or to give employers support to take people on, for example, with employment incentives, to give people the opportunity to train on the job. So I think this is a bit like a stage-wise approach. At first to reduce as much as possible your caseload, but then also knowing like who is at risk of staying in the caseload for a longer period of time and who will need retraining.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you so much. And there is one question coming through the chat. It is from Kim RP. And the question is, what is the root of the solution? Is it a matter of labor regulation only, or is it a matter of Europe being really capable of coordinating reindustrialization plans, technology plans, creation of quality employment, and of course, intelligent training and plans for people? It's a question and it's a remark in both of them. Does that lead to any reactions from your side, Christine?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of regulation only. I think in this respect, the most important bit is that the support is out there in order for people to match and find the new opportunities that are coming up. Regulation obviously is an important aspect, and also the financing of systems. I mean, there's just countries that have better systems in order to keep up training their workforce to live this idea of lifelong learning than others. And I think this is something, yeah, in the future, obviously with demographic change and everything coming along, I think. Yeah, the question is like public employment services will possibly transform into something which is more like public training services or helping people back to continue their career, because we cannot afford to actually lose anyone out there. And in that sense, I think this also is really important for both employment services, but also for employers to realize that we're facing a decreasing labor force in many European countries. So there's really a task to make the most out of everyone.
Well, thank you so far, Christine. And we will continue this panel discussion with Elodie Fazi. And I introduced her already as a team leader, public employment services within DG Employment. Welcome, Elodie. And
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good morning. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning. So thank you for the invitation. So this morning I'm representing the Secretariat of the European Network of Public Employment Services. For those of you who are not aware, it's a network that was created in 2014. And it brings together PES from all EU countries. And the objective of the network is to help the PES to compare their performance, to also help them on their way to modernization. So you won't be surprised that actually my point here will focus really on the European perspective and also on the aspect of public employment services. So maybe just a few words on this situation, the outlook on the labor market and the question of inclusiveness. I think it's very clear that the question of reaching out to the most vulnerable, of making the labor market more inclusive, it's a challenge that is really shared across all EU countries. And it's going to become, I would say, even more prevalent in the context of the pandemic. We know, for example, that many young people were dismissed or could not even enter the labor market in the last months. For example, at the beginning of this year, we had 18% of young people unemployed, which is 3 points more than a year ago. And we also know that they were much more actually much more affected than the adult population. We also know that 50% of people with a disability in the EU are in employment, but that compares to 3/4 of people without disability. So the challenge is really extremely clear. Really, this, you know it very well, it results from a very broad range of factors, from cyclical issues, structural issues, discrimination, skills mismatch, and so on. And to add to the challenges, we also know that the green and the digital transition will add to this challenge, because actually they will create a lot of jobs, but the low skilled and in particular older workers as well are likely to be more negatively impacted, thinking of sectors like mining, for example. So clearly we are now in a situation where I would say that the most vulnerable are clearly at risk of falling through the cracks. And the pandemic might lead to longer spells of unemployment, to longer spells of inactivity. So we would say now is really the moment to actually reach out to them, to help them back on the labor market, actually to keep this attachment to the labor market. And making sure that no one is left behind. It's also very important to reach somehow the objectives that all EU countries have fixed themselves. So in case you're not aware, earlier this year, all EU countries and institutions agreed on trying to make sure that 78% of the working age population is in employment by 2030. So it's a very ambitious objective. And to reach this, we really need to make sure that everyone somehow is on board. So the question is obviously how to go there, how to achieve this. And well, I'm speaking here from a European perspective, and it's clear that the responsibility is obviously first in the hands of member states, of countries. But really there's a lot that can be done at European level. And with the network of public employment services, we've been working, I would say, a lot on this issue. And the question of inclusiveness has been really a top priority, even more, I would say, this year. Later this year, you will find on our website a toolkit on how to support people with disabilities. We will also have just done a survey on how public employment services can actually help address discrimination. In a couple of weeks, we will also organize an event specifically on how PES can support vulnerable groups better. So really there's a lot of exchange on how to do this better, because we see that the challenge is somehow it's growing. But we can already draw, I would say, some lessons at this stage. So first of all, I would say that for many public employment services, supporting the most vulnerable, it really means thinking out of the box. It means providing an increasingly complex set of services. So we have obviously relatively classic measures like training, like subsidized employment, and they remain really the core of the work, the core business. But there's also a need, for example, to gain the trust of potential clients. And this can be done, for example, by reaching out very proactively to those who are actually not looking for a job, who are not registered with public employment services. And there's many examples to build on, like one-stop shops, like the Mission Locale in France. We also have so-called CISOC centers in Croatia, and many more examples. Digitalization obviously offers a lot of opportunities to reach out to more potential customers, to more potential clients. But as we've just discussed, they bring also about a lot of challenges. It also means to provide a broader set of interventions. So looking at also mentoring, at psychosocial counseling, which is extremely important if you think of groups who are facing multiple barriers. In many cases, what we have seen is that you need to look at post-placement support to regularly check in with the customer, with the employer, to really make sure that there's no risk of dropout. And when it comes to, I would say, the most vulnerable groups, such as young people, it's really important to actually make sure there is a sustainable inclusion in the labor market. Well, obviously, the missions of public employment services are becoming increasingly complex. And it's very clear that they cannot do all this on their own. I think we've said it before, and it's very clear also in the new strategy of the network. And they can do this in partnership with many more players, local authorities, employers, NGOs, education providers, who are really in the, I would say, also in the front line when it comes to inclusiveness of the labor market. And I also obviously cannot insist enough on the fact that there are many more opportunities at EU level to support this, in particular financial instruments like the European Social Fund, which is now starting with an envelope with close to 100 billion euro across Europe. But well, that's for the other partners. Obviously, come the question of the partnership with private employment services as well, which is a very important topic. So clearly, unemployment, skills, labor market intelligence are critical topics for public employment services and private employment services. And we see that there's many examples of cooperation across Europe, from, I would say, low intensity partnerships to much more structured partnership. So as a network, obviously, we do not have a common position on this issue, and it's really up to the individual countries to organize themselves. But what I can say here is that there's many examples, and that many of them tend to focus on clients which are somehow a bit closer to the labor market. For instance, when it comes to sharing vacancies. There are also some examples of public-private partnership when it comes to clients which are a bit further from the labor market, more vulnerable. We know, for example, that they take place in Luxembourg, in Ireland, with a focus on coaching, for example, for young people, which is a very important dimension. But I think that's a very strong point, I would say, for the network, that the partnership always need to be very well defined, very clear in terms of objectives, in terms of monitoring, in terms of what are the expected results. And I think one should really keep in mind that when it comes to group which might be more vulnerable, these interventions are very often costly and time consuming. And I think that's where the whole question of clarifying the rules of the partnership and monitoring the impact is, I would say, even more important when it comes to inclusiveness, I would say, of the labor market. So I think I will stop here my first introduction, and I would be very happy actually to hear more also about good examples from other member states and from the ground. Thank you.
Elodie, thank you very, very much for this introduction, this enthusiastic introduction into the topics. You are inviting the audience to share their experiences. So I'm inviting everybody to participate through the chat. If you don't want to participate through the chat, but you want to raise a question lively, you can put on your camera and we'll give you the floor. So raise your hands and I will give you the video and the possibility to ask the question. I have a question to you, first of all, Elodie. You mentioned that there are examples of cooperation with low intensity and highly more structured partnerships. Do you have any key for the audience? What is essential in the cooperation? What makes this cooperation successful? What are the elements for a good relationship? As Christine told you, a mature, trustful relationship. Do you have any experiences or any comments on that?
Well, obviously, as I said, the question of partnership is becoming even more important because we see that the needs are becoming diversified, and public employment services also have increasingly to support people who are still in the labor market, who are actually not yet unemployed. So, so that really involves working with many more different partners, and we've really tried to put this question high on the agenda of the network. And actually, this year we had a conference specifically on the topic of partnership. So I invite you to have a look at the Network Knowledge Center, where you can find really a lot of documentation and examples. Generally, we've identified 4 different types of partnership: the ones which are agile, the ones which are subcontracted, co-constructed, or supportive. So with very different levels of formalization. And from what I understand, really the key is to have a very clear understanding of the objectives of the partnership, because each different partners has different target groups, missions, objectives. And I would think that as long as this is not really clarified from the outset, that is really, I would say, one of the key actually success factors. So really being clear, and I would insist on that even more, I think, for the case of our discussion today.
Yeah. Thank you. As far as the Dutch situation regards, we have experiences in cooperating with the public employment services. And one of the key elements where it all starts is that you accept each other's role, that you accept the strengths and weaknesses of both parties, that you have good personal relations, that you share the successes. And normally we grow from the agile subcontracting kind of cooperation to the co-creating kind of cooperation, which is on a higher level, which is really sharing responsibility and sharing the teams. And one of the things you mentioned, first of one of the lessons was you have to think out of the box. That's what you mentioned. And that's one of the things which is really occurring when you share the experiences and the culture of the HR industry with the public employment services. That's what we heard from our members, is that this mutual sharing of cultural diversity brings enormous power to a team. So these are the two things I can mention. And I see now that there are some questions coming up. First of all, from Menno. Elodie mentioned this question for you, Elodie. You mentioned that there is no network-wide position on public-private partnerships. We know that underlying that is a reluctance in some countries to such collaboration. Can you elaborate on where this reluctance might come from? What should the network do to overcome this hesitation and build actually beneficial projects?
Well, when it comes to the network, I think the primary objective, if you look at the decision establishing, is really to learn from each other. And I think there's really a willingness to, and we've seen it this year, to expand the knowledge and the exchange on really what is working and what is not working so well. And I think it starts really with acknowledging the challenges as well, as you were just saying. So I think it's definitely a topic that we have touched upon and that we will continue touching upon. We're now working on developing the work program for next year, and definitely I would say the topic of partnership generally, including with private employment services, is something where we would welcome also examples and sharing experience. But definitely the role of the network right now is not to actually define how these partnerships should be organized in the member states. That is not the objective. So really this is left up to the individual member states and PES.
Thank you. There is a question also from Marius Osterveld from Swiss. How to face the classical answers from potential public partners? These are the traditional questions that were raised. And it is, there is no legal basis for your ideas. And two, we have to exclude that you make profit with your offered services. Classical questions.
Well, that's yeah. I assume that's indeed the key of the discussion as well. I mean, as I said earlier, I think it is about acknowledging that there are diverse objectives between public and private employment services, and about overcoming reluctance. I think as much as possible sharing evidence of monitoring the impact, and especially when exploring new ground, I think it's extremely important to actually monitor regularly how things have been going and to be open about the challenges faced.
Thanks so far. There is a question from Charles, which is a question to the other participants in this session, and he is interested in to better understand whether there has been much focus upon promoting greater participation of mature age workers in Europe or elsewhere across the globe. Is anything working well? Here in Australia, it has proved quite challenging. Is there any other one from the audience who can share experiences regarding the mature age workers? Is there anyone to share his or her thoughts to the chat or lively to a camera connection? I can share the experiences from the Netherlands, Charles, and that there is quite a lot of experience regarding this group. And we even have special agencies regarding this target groups, and they have all special programs. So we can share them beside the conference, but we have quite a lot of experiences. There is a reaction, surely this is a problem, that there is no criterion and joint leadership in Europe. Each country operates individual. We are losing great opportunities and ability to be better. That's more a remark than a question. Anyone else to share his or her thoughts on the question raised by Charles? If not, I would like to continue because Elodie, you asked for a really best practice on public-private cooperation. Well, this is one of the things we are going to hear now from Madeline Hill, because she is sharing a best practice also related to the groups who are more vulnerable. Elodie, you said that most of the cooperation is for the groups who are closer to the labor market. Well, now we're going to hear from Madeline Hill an experience of a group from Australia, which are really much further away from the labor market. So Madeline, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. I'm going to share some details on what we call the Recruit Able pilot, which is very much how we are creating a model of employment in Australia via mainstream recruitment companies. And it's evolving still, so I'll put that caveat out there. I'll start by setting the scene. In Australia, 77% of employers say that they are willing to take on people with disability. However, only 33% of employers actually do take on people with disability. And a significant proportion of that is actually by default. So it's not intentional. And even Randstad Australia, I'll say that we have people in our business who have disability, but we haven't hired them knowing that, and we haven't done it intentionally. So currently, the vast majority of employment of people with disability is done by specialised government-funded organisations, employment companies, but they're not mainstream. So the problem is that the government has spent billions and billions of dollars on funding specialist employment agencies, but we haven't seen the needle move at all in 20 years in terms of the percentage of people who are employed, the percentage of people with disability employed in the workforce. So I know that this is a global trend, and the employment statistics for people with disability do remain very low. So what we took to the government, the goal is to create, as I said, a successful model of employment for people with disability through mainstream recruitment companies and industry. And how this all came about was that Randstad was already working with the federal government. So we approached them to see if they would be willing to help us and fund us look into this and set up a pilot where we could really learn the challenges both within our company, within Randstad, but also within industry. So I don't think in Australia any mainstream recruitment company does this well. We don't have fabulously inclusive recruitment processes. So that's really what we want to look at from Randstad's perspective. And what we want to create is a blueprint or a roadmap for industry, for recruitment companies, for our competitors, large and small, that we can share so that we're all working toward the same goal. So what we have at Randstad, one of our global drivers is the fostering inclusive employment. And so we really wanted to take that and make it tangible and practical for customers and obviously for ourselves as well. So it is a collaboration between the Australian government and a partner called Get Skilled Access. Get Skilled Access are a specialist disability employment training organisation. We had been working with Get Skilled Access for a couple of years. We've done some work with them previously. So it made it quite easy. There was a lot of trust there already to be able to partner together to work with the Australian government to deliver this. So how we have gone about this is we asked a number of clients to commit to recruiting between 5 and 7 roles exclusively for people with disability over a 6-month period. And Get Skilled Access have provided all the upfront training. So that might be, or it includes the audit, the recruitment audit for accessibility, the hiring manager training for inclusiveness, the executive sessions that are delivered in terms of making sure you've got that executive sponsorship, the inclusiveness survey that went out to all of our employees, and this is done with our customers as well, to look at do we actually have an inclusive environment, and what are the good things, and then what are the things that we really need to work on and improve. And there was a lot of information taken from that. And then it's about Randstad. We need to train, we have trained our recruitment consultants to deliver this service to our clients who are participating. But we are also taking people on within Randstad as well, employing people with disability within our business very intentionally. So we asked clients to take this journey with us and to be really open to the learnings, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and to really be able to share the mistakes and the challenges that that they were facing and that we were facing along the way, because that's the critical part of this pilot. It's about what mistakes did organisations make, what challenges and barriers existed, and how did they overcome those challenges? How can we support them in overcoming those challenges? Because that will form part of the recommendations and the learnings that we report back to government in terms of creating this blueprint and this roadmap. So companies, you know, in terms of change and what specifically then can the government do to support organisations and mainstream recruitment to make it more inclusive for people with disability? There are very well documented benefits of employing people with disability by the likes of McKinsey and Deloitte and a number of other organisations around greater overall employee satisfaction, productivity, reduced employee turnover, etc. But what this slide really details is more around what the different groups, the different stakeholder groups within this pilot, and what some of their priorities were, because we really wanted to understand and meet those requirements. So the common threads were training, building confidence, because there is a certain amount of fear around working with people with disability, a fear of saying and doing the wrong thing. And sometimes it's just not having awareness. So the training really addresses all of that. And then what are the very practical things that we can all do to be more inclusive? So what does that look and sound like? What does it feel like to be an inclusive person, to be an inclusive leader, and to be an inclusive organisation? So this is everybody's responsibility. It very much is critically important for managers to role model that, but it is about educating to make sure that everyone knows that they have a part to play, and it is everybody's responsibility. So in terms of some of the challenges that we experienced, and as I said, this is ongoing, customers were very keen to hear about what the pilot was, but they loved the idea of it, but then they would say they weren't ready. And so it took a really long time to get customer engagement around this, and much longer than I had anticipated, and that the project team had anticipated. So customers saying things like it takes time, and I'm sure many of you have heard this. It's one of these things that I get really frustrated with, because change doesn't take time, it takes action. And time is not the most critical factor in becoming ready to employ people with disability. It's about action, and it's about taking the first step and then the next step. So the fear piece, as I said, people are quite concerned about saying and doing the wrong thing and offending people and ending up in sort of discrimination situations. And it is quite common, and it is quite a significant barrier. So the training, even though people are put through the training, they still need reassurance, and we call it hand holding here. People still need their hand held, customers still need their hand held to make sure they're doing the right thing. But there is also a challenge of people and customers making things bigger than they actually are, and I think it's about really breaking that down, and this is the step we're up to now, this is what comes next, and being very methodical around what to do, and how you do that, and when you do it. And I think, as we all know, you can do the best recruitment in the world, but if the customer's level of inclusiveness within their own organisation isn't good, then it can all fall apart. And that includes in the Randstad business as well in Australia. So there is certainly that level of inclusiveness that people need to get used to calling that out if there are behaviours that are not inclusive, and really recognising the psychological safety that's required, and the constant need to think about that and how we create a more inclusive culture. And one of the things, certainly in Australia, and I know this is global as well, is that a number of our candidates with disability don't want to or can't, for a lot of reasons, work 38 or 40 hours a week. A lot of them are looking for 30 or less than 30 hours a week. So an organisation's ability to be flexible, the more flexible an organisation can be around that, the more applicants we will see in the recruitment process. And so that level of inclusiveness is about expanding thinking as well. So I'm going to move on to some of the solutions that, that we have been able to put in place. I alluded to the partnership that we have with Get Skilled Access, and with the government as well. When we approached the government in the beginning of this pilot, as I said, we already had a relationship in place with Get Skilled Access. We've been working together for a couple of years, so that partnership was absolutely critical because we could not have done this on our own. We just don't have the credibility or the expertise to deliver that. And so the Get Skilled Access were critical in that piece. But the other great thing about working with a specialty disability training company was that they had a number of partnerships already in place with customers they'd worked with or built a relationship with, and we were able to really leverage that in terms of reaching out to them and asking them to participate in the Recruit Able pilot. And a lot of the customers have come from that, because a lot of the Randstad customers were really at the very beginning of the journey or just didn't feel that they were ready to participate. The training that is delivered by people with disability, and it enables you to dispel those myths and those preconceived ideas right up front and tackle barriers in a very direct way. And some people found that quite confronting. I think that's a good thing because it puts your own bias and your own issues front and center and really brings home your own thought processes. So that's one of the things that I would really recommend if you are embarking on any kind of program like this, is it has such a great impact on the people, the audience who are receiving the training. Customers.
I'm looking at the at the clock. And I want to have some possibility for the participants to raise some questions or remarks. Can you just finish in a few seconds?
Yeah, sure. So I think that in summary, that there is always a solution for the challenges, and it's about customers being willing to share it and accept that it's everyone's responsibility to make it all come together.
Great.
So happy to take some questions.
Great, thanks. And I'm giving the floor to the audience. If there are any questions, I see there is some comments in the chat relating to the questions raised earlier. I have one question so far for you, Madeline. What is the major learning experience from your situation in Australia regarding this group you want to share with the audience? What should other participants within their HR industry in their country should learn? What is the most important learning lesson?
I think you've got to do the pre-work. You have to have, I think, the normal principles of change and transformation, because it is a change program. Those principles absolutely apply, and you've got to communicate it. You've got to have all that executive sponsorship. It's got to be really tied into an organisation's strategic imperatives so that you can make it tangible and practical. So doing all that pre-work makes the actual delivery part of it run a lot more smoothly. A lot of work needs to go at the front end.
Okay, thanks. And is it a clear business case for both the clients and the agency industry?
I think so, yes. I think it's a clear business case. I think that many of us here know the benefits of hiring a diverse workforce. It's been very well documented by lots of organisations. And this is absolutely a way to achieve those equity, diversity and inclusion objectives. But in addition to that, it is the right thing to do. And we want to be in a position where we include all parts of the labour market. And this has been a great way to be able to do that.
Great, thanks so far, Madeline. And I'm just looking for last time into the audience if there's any questions. Inspiring story, someone is saying to you, Madeline, thank you for sharing. That counts for all the three of you. Thanks for sharing the experiences in this session. We're looking forward for next session on this topic. It's clear, and you were ending up with this remark, Madeline, is that we need a diverse and inclusive labor market. First of all, for the people themselves, because they have to have the opportunity to share in the working experience, but also relating to the mismatch in the labor market, we need everybody. So if there's any other experiences, I hope WEC will share them on another way, on another moment. Thanks so far for the introduction, Christine, from you. First of all, Elodie from your side, and Madeline also from your side, and all friends and colleagues, stakeholders, business partners of the World Employment Corporation. Thanks for sharing this session, and hoping to see you in some other session this day elsewhere. And I'm finishing this session now. Thanks so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Girlfriend,